Oh, I'm live. Hi, everybody. When I say everybody, no one's watching just yet, but we're going to talk to Vince Millet of the Secret Archives of the Vatican. Very excited about this. Let me just swipe this off. This is one of the joys of doing this by phone. And let me send an invite to Vince. All right. And there we are. All right, now we're waiting for Vince. Any minute now. Well, while we're waiting for Vince, I'm going to tell you that we're going to talk about his new album. Vince is with the Secret Archives of the Vatican, and we're going to talk about his new album, Elowen, and the one that's coming out next month, and that is called An Age Undreamed of. I can't wait to talk to him about it. Okay, come on, Vince. Let's see you. Sent out the invite, so it should be very shortly. But you know, sometimes I have these problems with Instagram Live. It doesn't always work out. Oh, here we go. Vince, where are you? Let's see. Do I do this? No? Okay. Waiting for you, Vince. Can you hear me? He's unable to join. Oh, man. Wouldn't you know it? All right, let's try this again. I'll send him another invite. Invite. And go. You know, fingers crossed. Hey, Vince, how are you?
I am good. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine. Thanks for joining us.
Great.
So let's see, it's around 1800 your time. Is that correct?
Yep. Bang on 1800. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you for spending a bit of your evening with us. And we're here, of course, we're going to talk about your new album. It's called Elowen. And you get another one coming out in what, March 17th? Is that right?
March the 15th, called An Age Undreamed, and that one is a bit more Viking-y.
Yes, I caught the Robert E. Howard Conan reference
Yeah.
there. So I don't know if you know this, and I didn't know this until this morning, but we've known each other for about over a decade now.
Oh,
About 12 years ago, I had an electronic music show, and I invited you to guest DJ. And at the time, you were doing like Middle Eastern, what they call Orientalism music.
yeah.
And yeah, well, so you've moved on from that, or
What
maybe you still
was
embrace
the
that.
show called?
It was called Solipsistic Nation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, right. This happens to me all the time. I know somebody from somewhere, and then I know them from somewhere else, and eventually I figure out they're the same person. This happens quite a bit. Yeah, still doing some of that, and at the moment, that is mostly coming out under the other band name that we use, Thousand Yard Prayer. I've that's my trans-global breakbeat dub science, as I call it, and the neo-medieval and the kind of Viking folk stuff at the moment is in the Secret Archives of the Vatican name.
All right, so I want to talk about that because I have another electronic music show. It's more ambient stuff. And a couple of years ago, you sent me some wonderful tracks, some gorgeous music, one by an Egyptian composer, slips my mind right now. But I wanted to talk to you very briefly. How did you make this transition to this Viking age music, this medieval age music?
Okay, well, a lot, yeah. I've always had an interest in folky music generally. This goes back like 40 years. Um, so there was always little bits of medieval music in the Secret Archives music. We occasionally did an actual medieval tune, but I never had the ability to actually get the right sounds. I couldn't play the instruments. I'm completely studio fakery kind of musician. Um, and then 2, 3 years back, suddenly there was a bunch of studio software, VST, sample library type things on the market that could actually do all the medieval stuff and so on. So I bought a couple of those, and suddenly I could do it. And kind of at the same time, I discovered this whole world um, with bands like Wadruna and Heilung and a bunch of other bands that get tagged as Viking music. And of course, Wadruna did some of the music for the Vikings TV series, but ultimately it's really got nothing to do with anything historical or even the Vikings. But it opened up a whole new world that I was quite unaware of before, and I just totally fell in love with it.
Well, I'm going to circle back to that in a second, but let's talk about the album that just dropped yesterday, Elowen. Tell us about this album.
Okay, so this one, because I've been doing two things in this last couple of years that overlap, but a bunch of them quite medieval, and a bunch of them have been quite this Viking dark neo folk. And the way the modern music industry works, albums are a thing of the past ultimately. So you put out a constant stream of singles on places like Spotify, and if you've got fans, people who have actually invested in you, then every so often you batch them up as an EP or an album because they will be interested in that. But your casual listeners on Spotify aren't interested in that. So anyway, I had all these tunes and time to batch them up, and I just decided to divide them into two halves. So all the medieval ones, new medieval as I'm calling it, came out in the album Elowen, and the Viking dark neo folk ones are coming out on the Age Undreamed album. So just dividing them up a little bit by genre.
So for people who don't know, when Vince says new, it's NU, like new metal, which I thought was very cute.
Yeah, one of the guys who's an ex-member of the band, well, goes technically he's probably still in the band. We were chatting a few months back, and he just said, "Oh, I really like your new medieval music you've been doing," and I just instantly picked up on it. I thought, yes, that's it. I've now got I can now create a genre that doesn't exist up until then. So I've been using the hashtag everywhere just to try and get the concept of new medieval out there.
So tell me about the vocalist who appears on the Elowen album.
The vocalist is pure software.
Really? When you said you were doing all the sampling of VSTs, I'm like, well, maybe it's not a person. And it's funny that we were talking about this because I heard an instrumental track from you a couple months ago. I'm like, oh, this would rock so much harder if it had the vocals of Lisa Gerrard from Dead Can Dance.
Oh,
And so when I heard the
wouldn't it
album, I'm like,
just?
oh, wonderful. But it's not even a person, or was a person at one
Well,
point.
it is a person. It's an odd one. It's from a VST called Era 2 Medieval, and it's got two female vocalists in it and two male vocalists, all in kind of medieval styly. So there's two ways you can use it. They will sing syllables, so you can actually write your music in or play it in if you play a keyboard, and just change the vowel sounds or whatever. So you can kind of make stuff up. But it's also got some actual phrases in there that you can match to the tempo of your song. So different tracks do different things. I've also got a similar one with Mongolian vocalists. Some throat singing. In fact, I've got two or three that do various types of throat singing, which are kind of very popular at the moment, increasingly so. And a lot of the kind of improvised sounding wailing stuff in some of the tracks, which kind of fit into some medieval stuff, is actually Mongolian folk singers, but you put it in a different context with different instruments around it. It just sounds different. But the nice thing is, and this was impossible 5 or 10 years ago, these are all real vocals being sung by a real person. What I'm doing is completely chopping them up and moving them, and all the different studio stuff you can do to things to make them sound differently, and putting them into our tracks, and suddenly I've just got this whole element to our music that for the first 30 plus years of us making music was just literally impossible because we didn't have vocalists available, certainly not ones who could perform to that standard.
So on Age Undreamed Of, that's coming up March 15th, not the 17th, and that's more Viking Age, and I say that in quotes, music. And that's something I wanted to briefly talk about because in my own little venture, Vikings versus Samurai, I'm not trying to be historically accurate. I'm trying to do as much research as I can, anything to lend it any sort of authenticity so the reader can immerse themselves and sort of
Yeah.
for a couple minutes escape and enjoy the fantasy. And in a way, the way this has been described, I forget the musician that you turned me on to. I think he's an Iranian composer, but he said
Yeah.
you take poetic license. So let's talk about that briefly. What's your take on all that?
Okay, so anything you have ever seen in a film or a TV program about Vikings, Saxons, that period of history, excuse me, is almost 100% historically accurate. The clothes are wrong, The way they behave is wrong. The armor is wrong. The military tactics are wrong. Everything is wrong. And similarly, in the musical world, there's this whole scene which is actually really big in Northern Europe, of Viking folk music, Viking neo folk, whatever. And once again, none of it is really historically accurate. So, for example, they all use this instrument, a uhiko or a tagelharpa, which isn't even from Scandinavia, it's from the other side of the Baltic, and didn't get invented till about 300 or 400 years after the Viking period. Every band uses it, and all those fans are absolutely convinced that that's a Viking instrument, and all the people selling it are selling as Viking bowed harp or whatever. So with drums, so I've got this drum that I bought from somewhere in Eastern Europe, I can't even remember where, and there it's got Skål the Sun Devourer on it, which is that's from Norse mythology. There is no historical evidence at all that the Vikings ever had drums. They probably did, but drums are made of wood and skin and will all have rotted away. However, the person you mentioned, Faria Faraji, is on YouTube. He's a Iranian-Canadian ethnomusicologist, and he did a whole long rant about how this Viking music has got nothing whatsoever to do historically. And he acknowledges that the main bands in it are completely open about, no, this has got nothing to do with history. This is just us exploring the roots of our culture, but there's nothing historical about what we do. And his take is, yes, absolutely fine with that. You know, we do it. And what you're doing, the Vikings never met the samurai. So what? You know, what you and I are creating is fun and culture. There are two things, though. He said one thing was there's a lot of the fans of the music who are absolutely convinced it's historical and get very angry and threatening if you kind of say, yeah, no such thing. They get very upset because they want to believe that, which leads to the other point, which his take is something I hadn't thought of, but I've been pondering it for the last couple of weeks since I saw that video, and I think he's absolutely right. These things that you do and that I do, they're not about the Viking era, they're not about the samurai era, they're about now.
Right.
They're about the things that inspire us and drive us. They're about things in our culture and our upbringing. They're about our feeling of belonging. They're about our desires for adventure. You know, they're about a whole stack of things that are about us, not actually about those things, you know. And we have picked up on, say, the Viking era. Other people might pick up on a different period of history and think, and it fascinates them, and they make art and culture around it, you know, because whatever it is that resonates with them, you know. And the key point is, it doesn't matter that these things aren't historically accurate, but like you alluded to earlier, and like I've found myself, I got into the music and all the films and all that led me to go and read up about it, and this way I know that it's all ahistorical. I've got a stack of books here about the Saxon period in particular. That's what I'm interested in at the moment. I probably wouldn't have gone there if I hadn't been hearing the music and seeing these daft TV programs. So they serve a purpose if you're intelligent enough to realize that's art and entertainment, and it might send you over to look at reality and history, and you learn some stuff. Doesn't stop you enjoying the nonsense that comes out on TV, you know. Yeah, and you know, samurai versus Vikings, they never met each other. So what? You're making great comics, you know.
Well, thank you very much. Well, you know, this takes me way back to maybe the 80s. There was a movie called The Last Temptation of Christ, and Peter Gabriel did the soundtrack. Yeah. Fantastic soundtrack. If you're watching, go listen to it. But again, nothing to do with the period of that time. But there was an instrument, the duduk, played by Siobhan Gasparin. I'm probably butchering the name. Yeah. But I'm like, what is this sound? I have to go find out what this is. And that turned me on to a bunch of Armenian music that I had not known about before. So thank you, Peter Gabriel.
100%. And that album was absolutely foundational in Secret Archives of the Vatican, finding our sound and going the way we did. Exactly that album, that specific album. And as you say, the duduk and, you know, various other things on there. And he dipped into a stack of different cultures on the album. But that album still sounds totally fresh. Paradoxically, music going back into various periods of history in different cultures sounds completely fresh and whatever. It almost illustrates what we're talking about. He was making a film for the 80s or whatever it was, and that worked with that, but really had nothing very directly to do with the times of Christ or whatever. We probably don't know anything about the music of that time actually, but somehow it captured and expressed the emotions and the feelings of 1980s people exploring that story.
Exactly. All right, so the new album, which dropped yesterday, Elowen, am I pronouncing it right? Elowen?
To be fair, I was hunting around for a title, and the way it was written down, it looks like the emphasis should be on the LOW, so Elowen is probably the pronunciation. It's Cornish, and it means ash, as in an ash tree. And Cornish is a language that died out and was revived. Cornwall historically was never part of England. There was a battle I did a track about, and I can't remember the name of it, where the Cornish hired a bunch of Vikings and they fought the Saxons, and the Saxons won, and that was the end of Cornwall being a separate country. So there are Cornish who still want independence, and I know one or two people who speak Cornish, say it's a revived language, very similar to Breton and Welsh.
All right.
Yeah, and I was just looking around for some title. This might even be one that ChatGPT suggested. I've been using ChatGPT, and I say, suggest me 20 titles for a piece of music or an album. Here's the genre, here's the sounds I've used, here's the feel and the vibe and the cultural things, and it throws me a bunch of titles, and I'd say 49 out of 50 of the things it gives me are absolute rubbish, but I've actually named 3 or 4 tracks, and I think Elowen probably came from that. It just throws me these things, and obviously I then go on Google just to check that it's not lying to me, but it suggested some titles that I would never have come up with, and you have to weed out the nonsense, but AI works for us.
All right, Elowen, and that dropped yesterday, March 15th. Yes, March 15th is an Age Undreamed of. If people want to listen to the album and if they want to pre-order the new album, where's the best place to go online? Is it Bandcamp? Is your site? Where should we go?
We're quite diligent at making sure that we're everywhere. Actually on Instagram we're on as Secret Archives of the Vatican, and we're also in there as 1,000 Yard Prayer, which is the 2 band names. So obviously people watching this are on Insta. We're there, and our Insta channel has got a Linktree link, as indeed I can see I've got your site up on my other screen, and that link will take you to all the places where we have music. We're basically on all the streaming sites, and we're on YouTube.
Excellent. And I want to thank you for letting me use your music for Vikings versus Samurai. I've used it in 2 of the motion comics. Hopefully we can collaborate in the future. And also you have a character, I don't know if you fleshed them out, but just the name was John Half-Saxon, I think was the name. And I was like, oh, that's a great name.
What was the one?
John Half-Saxon, I believe was the name.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I got into the habit of just making up little stories to go with the tracks. I can half remember that. So I churn out so much stuff I can't even remember what I've done.
I've got a brainwave here, and we can talk about this later, but why don't we include Half-Saxon in the story, and we'll use your likeness as one of the characters, if you're up for that.
Oh my God, that would be awesome and a privilege. Thank you.
All right. Well, speaking of which, the next issue for Vikings versus Samurai hopefully is going to drop this Tuesday. I'm going to compete with Netflix rebooting of Shogun. I'm sure like everyone's going to flock to my comic and not Shogun. But it's called Sellsword, and it features one of the player characters from the Warhammer Dark Heresy game that I played last year. It's my friend Taylor. It's his character Snorfinger. I can't wait until see how Booger is going to render this. But Vince, thanks so much for taking time out of your Saturday evening to chat with us about your new albums.
Great. Thank you very much. It's an honor, sir.
All right. On that note, peace. I'll talk to you later.
Later.
All right. Ciao.